All right, let's bring in my panel tonight. Sky News host Chris Kenny here in Sydney with me. Great to see you, Chris.
Great to be on the show, Sharri.
And also Chris Kenny's regular guest, Herald Sun columnist Susie O'Brien in Melbourne. Great to have you with us, Susie.
Thanks.
Now, let's start with this really worrying economic data that's been released today. Australia's GDP grew by just 0.2% in the quarter-on-quarter to March. So I'm just going to repeat that. Economic growth, just 0.2%. This is the weakest three-monthly rate of growth since the COVID lockdowns in the September quarter of 2021. We've seen reports in the papers since this data has come out today that some private sector analysts are now saying that the economy could even contract slightly over the second half of 2023. I mean, Chris Kenny, we are now looking at concerns that, the Treasurer has warned that the economy is going to soften, but this is even more serious. Do you think there's the possibility we could go into a recession? And also, do you think the rate hikes, because we've now had 12 of them, do you think they might not be enough at this point to bring down sticky inflation?
Well, the experts are saying that there'll need to be more interest rate increases, maybe 3 or 4 more to get it up over 5%, which is a hell of a worry. The problem here is that governments, the coalition, previous government and this Labor government spent too much wildly. Labor have only exacerbated the problem since they came to office. Remember, in opposition, they wanted the government to spend even more. But you had government spending and the Reserve Bank emergency measures overreacting to the pandemic. Now, that's not a matter of hindsight. Many critics were saying this at the time.
Yeah.
So we've delayed the sort of return to normal, if you like. So the interest rates came slower than they should have been. So they're going to end up being higher than they necessarily would have been. And there's a real fear that you could tip this economy into recession, especially when at the same time the Reserve Bank's trying to slow down the economy and suppress demand, so slow down inflation. This Labor government is tipping more money into the economy, having to pay rebates out for the electricity prices it's pushed up, increasing rental assistance, all sorts of other spending that, of course, they want to try and help people who are doing it tough. But this is inflationary. So it's a hell of a worry, and this is where you dream of that soft landing. But people of my vintage, we've been here before. My first mortgage, 17%. The recession that Paul Keating said we had to have, that was a terrible time with people being forced to sell their homes. A lot of people were losing their jobs, and let's just hope it's nothing like that.
Well, you could argue it might even be worse now because people are so leveraged on their mortgages and they took out these loans at record low interest rates. So, it could even be a worse situation. And also, the RBA governor clearly pointing out that he wants productivity growth to lift. He says this is the single most important thing that the government should be doing. And, he's trying to be diplomatic, but he's made that point quite strongly today.
Well, that's the other side of it, Sharri, is because the government in that front is doing the opposite to what it should be doing. It's re-regulating the labour market. It's reducing productivity rather than letting the market free up and take advantage.
Susie, let's bring you in here now. I think the really worrying thing for families is that we've had 12 rate rises. As Chris just said, it looks like the cash rate might get above 5% later this year, which, in real terms ends up being, above 8% on your actual bank loans, plus high petrol prices, plus higher cost of living at the grocery store, power bills. This is really starting to bite families.
You know what, Chris? I'm going to pick a bone with you. People my age who have got big mortgages are so sick of those who had their first mortgage in the 1980s complaining about their 17%.
Oh man, you lived my life working 3 jobs and it was tough. It was tough.
But there's one thing and there's no doubt that's absolutely the case, but there's one key fact that makes a huge difference. Back then, the average family could buy a house for 3 times their income. Now it's 10 times their income to buy the average house. So we are sure we are paying less interest rates, but people are borrowing so much more just to get a basic house. And you know what? 1/3 of people at the moment have taken out their loans just in the last 2 years. So you've got young people at the lower income earning at the peak of their exposure, their peak of their borrowing, and no wonder there is a huge amount of pain out there. I mean, they're saying that a quarter of discretionary spending has just disappeared. $300 a week wiped out of people's pockets, household pockets. There is real pain. When the only people doing a really good job are the food banks, you know there's a lot more trouble to come, a lot more pain to come.
Just let me jump in there, Sharri, because what Susie says is important. Now, I wasn't saying that it was worse back then. It was horrible.
No,
what I'm worried about is that it could be as bad as that now. Now, don't downplay what it was like in the late 80s, early 90s. A lot of people lost their houses, lost their jobs. It was terrible. And because interest rates are lower now, it doesn't mean that it's less of a problem, because people have got their mortgages at 2 and 3%, and it's now double that. So we got our mortgages at 7 or 8%, and it got doubled. So it's getting to very similar territory now.
The unemployment rate is the key difference, though. I mean, you know, we do still at the moment. Unemployment is rising, but it's still at record lows.
But that comes later. That's the trouble. Once you start to see people having trouble getting their jobs, wow, that's when you're in strife, because of course then you can't afford your mortgage.
And you're even starting to hear people worry about stagflation. If you do have a stagnant economy and high inflation, if the inflation gets entrenched, you know, it is very worrying. Susie, were you going to add something there?
I was just going to say we're already seeing 1 in 10 people missing mortgage repayments, and the pain isn't anywhere near over yet. So there is still a lot of pain to come.
Yeah.